Deputy Rabbitte to pose the question.
All right. To ask the Minister for Children and Youth Affairs her views on whether existing levels of capital funding for childcare providers are sufficient, and if you'll make a statement on the matter.
Minister.
I'm going to propose to take PQs 37 and 38 together.
Agreed.
Okay. A key priority for me as Minister for Children and Youth Affairs is to support the early learning and care and school age sector, childcare sector, through the provision of capital funding, where it is needed most. In this regard, I have allocated, I think, significant funding in recent years for the creation of early learning and care and school-age childcare places where most needed, and for improving the quality of this infrastructure nationwide. In 2019, I have secured a capital budget of €9.606 million for the sector. It will enable us to focus on the increasing number of places available and supporting the transition of services to the forthcoming affordable childcare scheme. €6.106 million of this funding has been allocated for the 2019 Early Learning and Care and School-Age Childcare Capital Programme. This funding will be delivered in 3 strands as follows. €4.231 million has been allocated to Strand A, which will offer grants of up to €50,000 in value to early learning and care providers for the creation of new 0 to 3 places where demand for these are clearly evidenced. $0.875 million has been allocated to Strand B, which will offer individual grants for up to €15,000 in value to aid community and not-for-profit early learning and care services in addressing fire safety issues that have been highlighted in inspection reports by TUSLA, the HSE, or local authorities. And then $1 million has been allocated to Strand C, which will offer individual grants of up to €20,000 in value to school-age childcare providers for the creation of new school-age places where demand for these is clearly evidenced. Funding will be available nationwide in a competitive process, with the application window open from Monday the 25th of February to Wednesday the 27th of March of this year. Applications will be appraised based on a number of criteria, including demonstration of need, value for money, capacity of the organization, that is compliance with scheme rules, project achievability, and socioeconomic deprivation in the services locations. Grants will be allocated to applications of the highest quality. In accordance with the principles of fairness and equity, no funding will be earmarked in advance for any particular area in the country, such as the northwest area of County Cork. One of the central aims of the capital programs is to allocate funding for projects where need is clearly evidenced, regardless of which region or area a service may be located in. The capital programs are necessarily a budget-limited exercise. Therefore, the maximum grant size available under each of these strands has been determined in consideration of both optimizing what can be delivered by each individual grant, as well as maximizing the amount of providers and children that will ultimately benefit from this funding. In addition, I'm very pleased to have ensured that childcare was identified as a strategic priority in the National Development Plan of 2018 to 2027, and to have secured €250 million in capital funding for childcare under the plan. And I think that this represents the kind of large-scale investment in the sector by the state that has not been undertaken since the wrapping up of the National Childcare Investment Programme in 2010. So this investment will be essential, I believe, to respond to the increased capacity we expect as the new affordable childcare scheme is introduced. The ACS will radically change how this country supports the cost of early learning and care and school-age childcare. Research is ongoing in my department to determine areas of specific need that the NDP funding will address when it comes on stream in the coming years.
First supplementary, Deputy Rabbitte.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. And yes, I do welcome the $9 million, and I have seen the progress that it has made. But I'm still not convinced it is enough. I'm still not convinced it is hitting the targeted area completely. And I'm just wondering, how does these figures match up with the department's growth projections for demands in the sector within the next 10 years? And when you just were to look back, and I think it's the second time I've spoken in relation to Mount Bellew community childcare services, like for them to put on an extra room, the costings that comes in is approximately 170,000, but the maximum grant that they could apply for is a 50,000 grant. Yet now they're turning away people. The likes of Mount Bellew, which is a feeder town to Athlone, to Galway, to Ballinasloe, and they have a capacity issue. And I really do think we need to see, is there another strand there for exceptional circumstances where we could be supporting childcare infrastructure and capacity?
1 minute.
Thank you. Exactly. Okay, I acknowledge or hear, I should say, that that you do not think the investment in terms of capital, in terms of this year, that 9 million, is enough. You're questioning also about the capacity to target where it most is in need, and if we miss some places, maybe not just because we don't have the money, but it's possible that we just missed the places. So I think in relation to your first question, your first statement, it's not enough. I accept what you're saying. I think that I will continue to look for more investment. There's no question about that. I'm grateful that I was able to achieve that amount for 2019. In terms of the question about the targeted aspect of it, I think that between the department and Pobble, they do a pretty good job in relation to targeting, with both scenario analysis as well as the ongoing feeding in from the different individual providers. But there can be, that they're not necessarily always absolutely maybe on the mark. That's why it is important for others to feed in if there are some concerns. And your question around, are there exceptional cases? As you know, the department is always open to hearing that and to working with providers in some way to continue to ensure their sustainability.
Deputy, first supplementary from Deputy Moynihan, whose name is linked.
Minister, parents are concerned that they would have availability of places locally and that they wouldn't have to be travelling all over the country to get access to Nainra, Montessori or the various services. And populations are growing in different areas. So, for example, Ballyvourna and Ballincollig, two fairly different scales. But in Ballyvourna, Clonraig is now occupied. Behind Coolnacarriga, there's planning permission approved for additional houses, and this is on top of demand that was already available, and parents are keen to have the centre and Nainra available to them. The scale of the funding, Minister, it's too small. Is there going to be a targeting, for example, to fit with the Stratéis Feheblian to provide additional support for Nainra positions? Similarly, Minister, Ballincollig, much bigger scale, where you've Lisheen Woods is already occupied, 50 houses. Mornans are building 130 behind the Gaelskull. Nagel's Garden Centre is occupied, and the field across the way has planning approved. So there's clearly much bigger growth and demand, and there was no spaces approved over the last year on it. Will there be additional priority given to places which didn't already get funding previously?
Minister, and then we have a few supplementaries.
Thank you. In relation to your last question, generally speaking, I would think yes, but obviously they have to fulfill all the various criteria in that regard. And also it's also dependent on the scale, again, of funding, and I accept already your colleagues' comments in relation to it's not enough, and that we will continue to seek as much capital investment as we can. So and so that if it is required for Nainras or other smaller facilities that weren't able to access before, that is taken into account in relation to the future. But as I've said, it has to be they also have to fulfill other criteria. In terms of the larger capital investment, and particularly in areas that you've identified where there is growing population and also housing developments. It is that's one of the reasons why it is important to be planning for this. My department is engaged in research to determine the current and future need for that kind of capital investment, and it's anticipated to give rise to, I think, a larger, more in-depth exercise where we will look at and take into account the issue issues that you've identified, Deputy, to see how to go about it, the criteria, and what are the most places of most need.
With 3 supplementaries now, short, snappy supplementaries, very short.
Okay.
Thank you, Minister. The recent Pobal survey of the early years sector found that 34% of toddlers were on a waiting list, and the Pobal also stated that there was a capacity for approximately 88% of Ireland's 3 to 5-year-olds, which I think lends into a cohort to attend childcare at any given point. So I suppose, Minister, 281,000 per city and county childcare, I don't think is sufficient when you break it down that way for delivery. So I'm still going back to again, is there a need to support critical infrastructure in identified areas?
Deputy Moynihan, a brief supplementary.
And Minister, I've cited 2 examples there, such as Ballincollig and Ballyvourney, but they're surely we're aware of numerous others across North West Cork. The current allocation of over the 9 million, that's leaving only about 200,000 per county. For a county the size of Cork, that's either one of these places that I've talked about would swallow that allocation up immediately. Is there any indication that you'll be able to put additional funding towards larger counties and where there will be larger demand, the likes of, I've said there now in Cork? And also, I asked about whether the Strategic Feheblian and the need to support centres, NINRAs and others that are conducting their business at scaling, whether that will also inform directing funding towards that direction.
Brief, sorry, Minister. Relevant supplementary.
I could go around the houses in North Cork, but I won't. I'll ask you Corla and East Cork for that matter. I just want to ask the Minister if she anticipates that the 9 million allocation will actually be used up. Does she anticipate that full allocation will be taken up?
That's it. The chance to the 3.
Thank you. Just to answer the last question first, yes, I do, Deputy. Yes, I do. I do, in terms of our past experience. And in fact, usually, there's more applications than we can fund. Secondly, in relation to both the queries in terms of the other deputies, I think you are well aware the department works very closely, and you've quoted a Pobal in relation to waiting lists, etc. And to the extent that it is possible, I think, and the science that's available, we do work regularly with Pobal in terms of anticipating scenario analysis, etc., in terms of where the need is and therefore what are the costs required in order to build the capacity. That is not to say that there might be some gaps in terms of critical infrastructure in certain areas. And again, that is part of the information that really needs to continue to be fed into the department, I think particularly through the county childcare committees or even directly. In terms of the amount of money for a big county like Cork, indeed, I shall remember that. I shall bring that into to the debate in relation to negotiations in terms of increased investment. I think that you would be aware, usually if it's a larger county and a larger population, one would require more investment in terms of the capacity.
We'll move on to 30 seconds.